My name is Brandon Johnson. My company is Valence Group. We are a public safety grant writing firm with particular emphasis on fire and EMS. I'm a firefighter, paramedic, critical care paramedic, about 18 years in the industry, so I'm old. Been around a while. My introduction to grant writing was really out of necessity, probably much like yours. It wasn't something I had a particular passion for. It was just something that needed to be done, and our chief said, "Oh, but you showed some interest, so guess what? You're now our grant writer." So I've spent the last 18 years sort of honing my skills and teaching others to do the same. So what we're going to talk about this morning is not how to fail, literally, but some things to avoiding some pitfalls that are commonly encountered. How many people in here have written grants before? Show of hands. None? Zero. Okay. What kind of grants do you write? AFG mostly? Any foundations, state grants? Yeah? Okay. Good. There's a lot of different options out there in grants. Now, we sort of gravitate towards the AFG, the Assistance to Firefighters Grant. That's probably the one that everybody knows. But what you probably didn't know is that in the public sector, in the foundation side, they gave away about $41 billion last year. So when you compare that to public monies, there's a lot more money on the public side, on the foundation side. So just want to give you some information on things to avoid to prevent your application from being denied. All right, some of the objectives for today is to understand the grant writing process. It's always better if you look at it as a process. Okay, if you attack each segment in order, it helps you to be organized, and it'll ultimately benefit your application a great deal. Discuss the most common reasons for application failure and how to avoid them. That's our primary focus here today. Describe the fundamental elements of grant and proposal narrative. These are specific to the application. So if you've written the AFG grant, you know what you're expected there. But we'll talk a little bit about some other proposal types and sort of a general format that you can use. Describe the purpose and role of the proposal and the narrative components. Each one of those components is really answering a question. You know, what is your need? Why do you need it? What's your solution? Why can't you pay for it from your budget? That sort of thing. Then we'll talk about developing a budget. Some of the topics we'll cover is that process, sort of an organized approach to grant writing. The top 5 reasons why we fail. And really, I think if you distill all these reasons down, there's really one, overlord problem. It's because you didn't follow the directions. It's pretty simple. Proposal and narrative types, budgets and matching, and then we're going to do a writing exercise. Everybody's going to be excited about that, I'm sure. All right? So you can do this. It's not rocket science. Okay? Every application has very specific guidance, and it tells you how to win. It tells you exactly what you need to do to get funded. So as long as you look at the guidance and you read it and you know it and you understand it and you apply what you read, more than likely you'll be successful. A team approach works best. This isn't always possible. At my department, my team it's me. What do you guys find? Do you have grant writers on staff at your agencies? I see a lot of no. It does help if you can enlist the assistance of others in your department to help you. Identify strengths of team members. If you've got somebody that's particularly good with writing, technical writing, that sort of thing, use him for the writing portion. Have someone do the research. So try to split and conquer and divide the tasks. Attend workshops and training. Every year the AFG grant puts on really good workshops where they give you tips on how to succeed. So try to attend those. And if you can't, they generally post those presentations online, so you can download them and watch them at a later date. But develop a grant process, and most of all, be persistent. Have you been turned down in the past? Everybody's got that letter in the mail that says, sorry, buddy, no money for you this year. So generally, they're pretty vague, right? They don't give you a lot of information about what you did right or what you did wrong. It's pretty general, so it's sometimes pretty tough to figure out. But be persistent. Stick with it. And for whatever you do, don't reapply with the same narrative and the same application that you submitted the previous year. Try to go back and figure out where your weaknesses were. Rewrite it, rework it, but don't resubmit the same application again, because you're probably going to get the same result. All right. Let's take a look at this process, and it might be a little bit difficult to see, but the first square here is your project identification and budget. We're all pretty good about that, doing that. We all know what we want. Okay, but what you need to do is determine what is a want and what is a need, because there's a big difference. I want a lot of things, but I really need this. Okay, the need is where you're going to have your best shot. Okay, because you're going to be able to justify that need more easily than would be a want. Okay, so identify your project and set the budget. Locate grant sources. If you haven't gone out and looked beyond the AFG in the past, this might be a new area for you. I'm doing a talk this afternoon. It'll be some of the same information, but we're going to focus more on other opportunities, not just AFG. So that's at 2:30, I believe. But locate grant sources. I'll give you guys, if you come around later today, and if you're not going to be in the session later, I'll give you my card. Shoot me an email. I have some packets of information that I'll send you guys via email. But locate grant sources. This can be kind of tough. There are some subscription databases out there that will help you find local and state grants as well as foundation opportunities, but those can be pretty expensive. $8,000, $10,000 for a couple-year deal. But there are some out there that are cost-effective and do a pretty good job, and I'll share those with you. Research and project development, application and narrative development, review and edit. This is really important. Once you stare at something for so long, you've been working on this document for a week, you lose all objectivity. You need to give this to a fresh set of eyes and let them proofread it and give you an opinion on if you're presenting your message the way you want it to come off. So make sure you get a second set or a third set even of eyes on your application before you submit. And then once you submit, we all know what happens then. We sit and wait and we cross our fingers, right? All right, we all know what grants do, but they'll provide fire and EMS agencies with a means to supplement their budgets. And you can use them for apparatus, personal protective equipment, EMS equipment, staffing, scholarships, and on and on and on. So it really just depends. Most grants will have a focus on a certain item, if it's equipment or if it's personal protective equipment. Staffing, like the SAFER grant. Anyone been awarded a SAFER grant? Yeah? How many? What was the total? Pretty big? Two? Okay. That's good. How about you? Yeah. That grant has had a huge amount of money flowing back into it because people can't, they can't maintain it, so they have to give the money back. We had a local department that was funded this year that actually had to give their money back because their city council said, no, we're not going to be able to do it. So, all right. Identify projects. Avoid the Christmas list. You know what I'm talking about. When grant season comes around, out come the projects. From every dark corner of the firehouse or the station. We want this. You walk around the trade show floor out here, how many Giz widgets are for sale? Everybody's got a little something that they'd like to have. But you really have to select a need versus a want, or a nice to have, all right? So focus on your critical needs. Identify areas of your operation where you have a deficiency in training, equipment, maybe it's a vehicle, but make sure that it's a deficiency. That way it's more easily justified. Focus on a project that has a measurable outcome. So look for projects that will enhance your operation, and it's something that you can quantify. Okay? This purchase will allow us to respond more safely, whatever. Just make sure it's something you can measure. Make sure it's cost effective. If you're a small rural EMS community and you're asking for a helicopter, not going to happen, right? That's not a cost-effective solution. So make sure that whatever you're asking is reasonable, all right? Make sure that it's aligned with the grant priorities. If it's a vehicle grant and you request personal protective equipment, it's not going to work out for you. If you look at the AFG grant, and we're going to do, like I said, a little exercise around the AFG grant in a little bit, but make sure you know the priorities for your agency type. So if you're rural, urban, or suburban, so AFG will prioritize projects, both equipment projects and vehicle projects in medium, high, and low categories. So make sure you know what your priority is for the project you're requesting, specific to the AFG, to enhance your ability to be funded. If your tallest building is 2 stories and you're requesting a 100-foot tower ladder, not going to work out so good for you, all right? So try to align it with the priorities of the grant. Solve problems with creative solutions. So think about solutions to problems that maybe are out of the box. Okay, when that goes to peer review, that's going to score well because they're going to see that it's a unique idea. And as long as you present it as such, you should do pretty well. Conduct a needs assessment. So this is really where you're going to determine need versus want. All right? So carefully examine risks, critical infrastructure, things like that in your response area, and focus on critical needs in equipment and training and that sort of thing. Prioritize your findings. If you have multiple items, it used to be that on the AFG grant you would put 4 or 5 items in there and it would divide your score based upon the number of items that were in your budget. Now it's changed a little bit. So now each budget category or activity is scored upon its own merit. So you don't have to be terribly concerned that, you know, including some EMS equipment and you need fire hose as well, you don't have to be worried that your EMS equipment or your fire hose, if it's not scored well, it's going to drag down the whole application. All right, compare and align your needs with those of the grant and include measurable operational outcomes. And I like to include, if we're not funded, what's the detriment to our department and our response area? Okay? If we don't get this piece of equipment, what could happen? What are the negative impacts of not having that piece of equipment or that apparatus? All right, this is important. A few slides back we said that grants are meant to supplement. And that's a word I want you to remember. It's a supplement. Okay? Most government grant programs have what's called a non-supplanting clause. And supplanting means you're spending Uncle Sam's money when you had it in your budget to spend your own. So it's meant to enhance your ability and supplement your budget, but not to replace your budget. So if you have $500,000 budgeted for a new pumper, and you go and ask AFG for $500,000 for a new pumper, they're going to see that, or you're going to lie about it, one of the two, to get it through. So it's not meant to supplant. So like we talked about, there are multiple sources of grants out there. The ones we're most familiar with, of course, are the federal. But there are state and local grants. There are quite a few states that have EMS and fire grants available to them. Any states in here have? I know PA does. Who else? North Carolina does. Nobody else? State grant? No? Where are you guys from? You don't have one. Okay. There are quite a few. I think there were 31 or 32 at my last count that have them. So, state and local grants. Don't forget about your local civic and charitable organizations. And those guys get hit up pretty often, but don't forget about those guys. And even if it's not the full amount of what you're looking for, maybe they can help you with a match or some cash match or maybe some in-kind contributions. So don't forget about your local civic organizations. The corporate grants and the foundation grants are really one and the same. So they're all foundations, but it's just how they're created. A corporation can form a foundation to act as its philanthropic organization to give money to whatever charity or whatever group that they're interested in. And then you have foundations that can be community or family foundations, which are typically endowments. Someone that had to die that left a big pot of cash. And generally what they'll do is they'll operate the foundation off the proceeds of that endowment, and they'll give away a certain percentage of that money every year. Mm-hmm. Yep.
As long as you're not, there's certain, they exclude certain types of places. Like they won't donate to the local 4599.
Right. Yeah.
Firefighter Association, but the fire department can get money through that. And it's all because when you bought the chassis for your ambulance, they gave you some number that gives you like a fleet discount.
Mm-hmm.
Entitles you to apply for the Ford Foundation.
Yep. So there are a lot of different foundations out there. There are actually a little over 100,000 foundations in the United States. Like I said, they gave away about $41 billion last year, so that is a huge chunk of cash. Now, all of that cash isn't going to fire and EMS, of course, okay? It's not focused like the AFG grant or the UASI grant or one of these grants that has a particular focus. It's more ambiguous. So if you do a foundation search, you might search keywords like public safety. You can use EMS, fire, disaster recovery and response, that sort of thing. So you're not, it takes a little bit of getting used to actually do those searches, but it's pretty simple once you figure it out. What we like to do is focus on foundations that are geographically close to where you are, because then they have skin in the game. It's your local foundation. If it's a corporation or a family foundation, that sort of thing. So get organized. Like we said before, team approach works best. If you're a team of one, like I am, and I would bet most of you are, that's what you've got to do. But know the grant's priorities. Anytime you can cite OSHA, NFPA, and any other nationally recognized standard or some research that's been recently peer-reviewed and published, that's great information to have. That's a huge bonus in your favor. So look for, I'll give you guys these slides too. Look for those things that you can include in your application, because that really bolsters and lends more credence to what you're asking for. Gather your demographics and statistics. The U.S. Census Bureau does a pretty good job of putting together statistics that you can use on your application, not just your population, but your median household income, that sort of thing. Those are all good when it comes to financial justification and that sort of thing. The financial justification or the financial need, this is where people fail. Okay, anybody can articulate the need for a piece of equipment or a new piece of apparatus or some PPE. Where you fail is the financial need. I have been given hundreds of narratives to review that were not funded from other departments, and it's always the same story. We don't have any money. Okay? Why don't you have any money? Give me some reasons why you don't have money. Tell me some factors in your budget or your taxing district. Give me some things that are negatively impacting your budget. That's what we need to see. All right? So when it comes down to the competitive nature of these grants, it's, you know, the battles are here in financial need. So spend a lot of time on financial need and get it right. Learn from your failures. Everybody used the Get Ready guide and the self-evaluation for AFG. Okay, that is the key as far as that grant goes. If you are well aligned with the priorities of the grant, you have a high priority, and you use those guides to get ready and you assess your application and your narrative, you should do pretty well. All right, and like I said, if you do get turned down, the letter that they send, you've seen it before, not a lot of information there. So, but go back and get another set of eyes on your application. Go back through it. Go back through that, those guides and figure out where did we go wrong here. If you have something that's particularly problematic, shoot me an email. Shoot me your narrative. I'm glad to look at it. I'll look at them all day long. So we'll take a look at it for you. So the cold hard facts, these grant programs are highly, highly competitive. As the pool of dollars dwindles, the applications are shooting up. So that's a recipe for, you know, disaster. Highly, highly competitive. The pool of grant dollars is limited as far as the Fed goes. Who remembers when AFG had surplus? The first couple of years, they couldn't give away the money. I mean, there was literally surplus at the end of the grant. Yeah, not anymore. Only the best proposals will be funded. And sometimes by no fault of your own, if you're a small rural agency, you know, the computerized review is going to look at your population and your run volume and all those sorts of things, and it's going to score you based upon that. So I think that's really caused the smaller departments to be underserved by the grant. And I talk to a lot of people that say, hey, if we're not Chicago Fire, FD&Y, nobody's getting funded. They are getting funded, but they do have a distinct advantage because they do have a huge population to protect and a lot of runs to back it up. So by the nature of the computerized review, you're a little bit of a disadvantage from the get-go. Small mistakes are often fatal for the application, not you. But little errors, you forgot to check a box, you didn't include a number where it required one. Luckily, the AFG application is fairly intuitive, and it's going to say, hey, dummy, you can't go on until you put something here. But other applications aren't so great. A paper application, if you miss something completely, it's probably going to go right in the garbage pail, and you're never going to know what happened. All right? The most common reason that applications fail to be funded, anybody know? You didn't follow the directions. It's pretty simple. Like I said, those guidance documents are the key to success. They tell you exactly what you need to do to be funded. And if you don't follow those, then you're on your own. You're really out on a limb. Okay? So I think if you look at this list of 5 things, you can really distill it down to you didn't follow the directions. Because they're all about following the directions. Number 1, you didn't follow the directions, dummy. You didn't listen to what they were saying in the guidance document, and you went off in another direction, and you weren't rewarded for your efforts. So your project wasn't aligned or was low priority. Even in foundation grant writing, state grants, they do have their projects that they would like to fund. And if you're asking a foundation who doesn't fund vehicles to buy you a vehicle, then you're not going to do real well with that. Financial need poorly articulated. You did not substantiate your financial need. You told them you didn't have money, but you didn't tell them why. So spend a lot of time on financial need. Failure to meet the requisite eligibility criteria. Show of hands, who applied for AFG this year? Were you confused with the sam.gov registration? Did it work for you? Yeah, it was frustrating. Yeah. Right, exactly. So there was a new requirement this year. In previous years, it was called the Central Contractor Registry. They changed that. I guess, I don't know, somebody needed a job, so they were in Washington, right? Everybody understands how it works. So they changed it over from the Central Contractor Registry. Now it's the System for Award Management. It's essentially the same thing. So if you had a previous record in the CCR, supposedly it was going to all transfer over, but I had a lot of people that didn't pan out. Sort of like the healthcare.gov website. Didn't pan out. So there are criteria like that registration, a DUNS number. Everybody know what a DUNS number is? You probably have one at your department whether you know it or not. Okay, it stands for the Data Universal Numbering System. It's sort of like a social security number for your department. All right? It just standardizes address, contact information, and that sort of thing. Unpolished proposals. Any procrastinators in here? Nobody? Yeah, there's one honest person in the room. It's tough, you know. Grant writing in fire and EMS is not our primary focus. At least I'm sure in most cases it's not. So you got about 10 other hats that you have to wear until it's time to write a grant. And then you've got to squeeze it in between runs and training and other stuff. So it's not your primary focus. You put it off. I'll do that next week. I'll do it day after next. It doesn't happen. So you put together a sloppy proposal because now you've got a short deadline. And you submit it, and it doesn't do well. Shocking. All right? But make sure you take the time to polish up your proposal. Make sure your narrative is good. Make sure your financial need is substantial before you submit it. So the guidance or the directions to a grant provide the key to winning the cash. It's just like a multiple choice test. All of the right answers are right in front of you. You just have to sort it out. So read the guidance and the directions several times and seek clarification if you need to. Anybody call the AFG help desk? Was it helpful? No? Yeah. They're notorious for, I'll have to get the guidance. Well, I have the guidance. I can read it. I'm just needing clarification on a few points. Sometimes they don't do a good job of doing that. But when you're looking through the guidance or the directions for a grant, the grant application, look for buzzwords like must and shall, because if you don't do those things, your application is going to be denied. All right? So look for buzzwords. Complete all the narrative written responses in the required format. If you choose the Wingdings font for your narrative, it's not going to work out for you, okay? Typically, I'll use Times New Roman 12 point. It's pretty well accepted as the norm. I don't like using italics and bold and underlining and highlighting and all that business. It's just it's a distraction. So try to just stick with it. Know the format. AFG is pretty simple. You just cut and paste out of a Word document and put it in there. Not a big deal. But there are some that are very specific. Use double spacing, use this font. And if you don't do those things, then your application is going to go to the garbage. Use your words. You know your need. You know your department. You know your service area. Only you can articulate what what you're trying to do. Using a boilerplate or a template narrative is just not going to work too well. They're out there. They're on the internet. Everybody always calls, do you have a template for, an ambulance? No, we don't use templates. Because what happens is when you have a group of people that sit in a peer review and they read narratives all day long, they say, wait a minute, I've read this narrative 10 times now. It's the same narrative, okay? There's nothing illegal or really unethical about it. It's just not original work. It's not going to score well. So if your application makes it to peer review, it's going to get scored pretty crummy there. So try not to use boilerplates and templates. Number 2, project not aligned or is low priority. Focus on the priorities of the grant program and try to select a project from your needs assessment that closely matches the priorities of the grant program. If the requested project is ineligible, and AFG always publishes a list that says these things won't be funded, and I think workout equipment was recently added to that either last year or the year before. So if you're requesting gym equipment, it's not going to work out. Lower priority projects will require much more detailed justification if they're to be competitive. So if you choose a vehicle in the vehicle acquisition activity and it's for your area, if you're an urban area and it's a wildland firefighting truck, it's very low priority, if it's a priority at all. It may not even be, I'm not sure. But you're going to have to really justify that project. So try to align it best with the priorities and ignore them at your own risk. I hate to keep beating on this, but in today's world, the financial need is where the battle's fought and won. So spend additional time there. Don't just tell them that you have no money. Pick the top 3 or 4 things that are negatively affecting your budget, so you can say, we've had a 32% increase in healthcare cost year over year for the last 5 years. Or our state retirement plan last year mandated that we pay 10% more this year. Or whatever. Workers' comp went up. Use those things to your advantage, and that really supplements your financial need. If you've been denied by other grant programs, tell them about it. Tell them, we have looked, we are not able to fund this project from our budget, and we have tried. We have sought funding from these sources, and we've been denied. If you've been turned down from AFG in the past, make sure you tell them. We have applied for this piece of equipment for the last 2 years, and we have not been funded. Let them know that. Pay careful attention to all eligibility criteria. AFG is pretty cut and dry. You're either a fire department or you're a non-affiliated EMS department. Now, there are some little gray areas there. What type of EMS does it say not eligible? What is it? Hospital-based. Yeah, hospital-based. Are you hospital-based? Yep. Okay. Are you guys actually, your paycheck comes from the hospital?
Technically, no, but that's a whole other issue.
Okay. Yeah, it gets pretty tricky. But there are some agencies out there that are technically, they're not hospital-based, but they carry the name of the hospital, but they're run as a separate 501c3 organization or a nonprofit organization. So the ambulance service is technically nonprofit, and they're organized separately. So at first glance, you would think, well, they're probably not eligible, when in fact they actually are. So, if there's a gray area, dig into that a little more in detail and see if you can't flesh it out. Know your department's tax status. I talk to a lot of departments, and I ask them, are you a 501c3? Are you a nonprofit? Yeah, we're a nonprofit. We're tax exempt. I said, no, I didn't say tax exempt. I said, are you nonprofit? Are you organized under 501c3 of the IRS code, which, if you're receiving money from a foundation or a corporation, you really need to be. Oh, yeah, we are. We definitely are. They're not. They're a municipal department that's, they don't pay sales tax when they go to Sam's and buy toilet paper and coffee, but they're not a nonprofit organization, so they're not eligible under some of those grant programs. So, all federal and other grant programs require a DUNS number. think since 2003, you've had to have a DUNS number. If you end up on a website that tries to charge you to get a DUNS number, get away from it. DUNS number should be free. It's from the Dun & Bradstreet Corporation. I think it's dnb.com. It takes no time to fill out the application. You can also search to see if your department actually has one issued. Maybe an old chief or somebody that was around a while back had one and you didn't know about it. So you can search to see if there's one already created for your department. Likewise, the tax status thing, I'll give you a website you can go to. It's actually a utility on the IRS website, and you can search. It's the IRS 501c3 master list, so if you're not sure if a department you're helping or working for is a 501c3, you can check it out pretty quick. And if you're not on the list, you're not a 501c3. It's pretty simple. All federal grant programs require the valid registration with the system for award management. We talked about that. So now you need a DUNS number and you need SAM. That's for any federal grant program, not just AFG. There was some question early on at FDIC. I was talking to some folks from AFG and they said, well, yeah, it's kind of a soft requirement. We're not going to require it before you submit. You just have to have it before you're awarded. Well, as it turns out, that wasn't the case, because it says right in the application, do you have it or you don't? And if you don't, you can't submit the application. And you can imagine with this new requirement that there was huge numbers of people going to the website to try to get registered, and they were crashing the website, and early on it was really difficult to even get the application submitted. Unfinished proposals. Have several other people, not just one. Take a look at and proofread your application. Check it for clarity and flow and make sure that it's coming off the way you want it to and that your message is clear. And if available, use the self-evaluation tools such as the AFG evaluation sheet to check your narrative responses. Avoid using odd fonts like wingdings and some of those crazy scripts. Use Times New Roman 12 point. It's always a safe way to go. And be cognizant of the maximum number of characters per narrative response area. Okay, they're not all the same. And sometimes from year to year they change that up a little bit. So. All right, let's look at some proposal types or narrative types. So there are the application-specific types, and those are just like AFG. You know, it used to be you had one big master narrative, and they broke it up into those sections now. So now you've got to cut and paste a bunch of times instead of one time. So they're application-specific, usually in the form of narrative responses to questions that are posed in the application. For the AFG, you've got the project description and budget, financial need, operations and safety, and then the statement of effect. Okay? And we're going to go into that a little more in a little bit. Most of the corporate and foundation grants that we deal with will require, at a minimum up front, what's called a concept letter or a letter of intent. It's a 2-page miniature proposal that just says, hey, here's who we are. This is where we are. We have a need. This is what the need is, and this is why we can't afford it. So it's sort of like distill the AFG narrative components down to a very small miniature proposal, and it's 2 pages at the most. Okay? So it's a pretty simple approach. Now, once you draft one of these concept letters, you kind of have a template. And I told you I don't like templates, but in this case, it works just fine because you don't have a group of peer reviewers. You're submitting to different organizations all the time. So you can sort of adjust, you know, the project budget and the equipment requested and use that same proposal. So it's usually 2 to 3 pages max. It's just a mini proposal. It's sort of your cover letter, who you are, where you are, the problem statement, and it's succinctly state the need. You don't need a huge, big, long, dissertation. Just something brief that tells what the problem is. Clearly define your objectives and your goals, the details of the budget, and your expenses. anytime you can approach a foundation or a corporate foundation with multiple partners, we're requesting you fund 25% of this project, or 50%, or 75%. They like to work together with other foundations. So if you're interested in going that route, try to group some foundations together and let them share the burden a little bit, all right? And then you've got the full or the long proposal, and luckily for us, this is not something we typically have to deal with unless you're doing EMS research or something real high speed like that. So, these can be hundreds and hundreds of pages. So it looks like it looks like the Obamacare legislation laying there. It's just this huge, big, massive document. But it contains an executive summary, a statement of need, your project description, budget, organization information, and conclusion. So they can be pretty beefy. Luckily for us, we don't have to deal with this type of application or proposal. All right, budgets. The budget of a proposed grant project serves as the blueprint for spending. It tells the grantor what you're requesting, how much it costs, and then each of the items in your budget. They're your direct cost, your indirect cost, in-kind and cash match, and then your budget totals. Did anyone know that you can, well, on a case-by-case basis, you can use trade-in value for AFG towards your cash match? Yeah, I hadn't seen it until this year, and somebody said it was in there the year before last, and I said, I don't remember ever seeing it. So the idea is, let's say you need new cardiac monitors, and you have LifePak 10s, and you want to trade those in. They'll give you fair market value on a case-by-case basis, the way I understand it, towards your match. So if you get $10,000 in trade value, you can apply that towards your cash match on your project. If you have a $30,000 cash match requirement, then $10,000 comes off the top. Yeah, yep. That's the only mechanism that I can see where you would include it, would be to include it there. And then, yeah. Yeah, and that's a. Well, yeah. How much is too much? I think that's what you're saying. So the idea, the question was, if you overmatch the requirement, yeah, now you're starting to, you're getting close to. I just told you I don't have money, but I can match 30–40%. So I guess as long as you can justify that, just say, listen, we do have this money available. We can spend up to this much from our budget. Then, yeah, theoretically, you should get a competitive advantage for overmatching the requirement.
Why would you have to identify trading value? I think the question on the AFG grant is simply, do you have the match funds available?
No, exactly. This was just a new, something they added. It says instead of cash, because the matching requirement for AFG has to be non-federal cash. It can't be in-kind contributions or anything else. But what they said was, if you have a $30,000 match requirement and you can prove a $10,000 trade-in value on a case-by-case basis, they will reduce your cash match by the trade-in value amount. So if you're trading in equipment, let's say to physio control, you're trading in old heart monitors for new heart monitors, and they gave you $10,000 in trade, they'll reduce that from your match. And that's something really new. I've never seen it before. And I've never heard of anyone doing it, actually. So keep that in mind. If you have equipment that you're going to trade in, it might be an option for you. All right, matching contributions. The foundations love the in-kind contributions, and those are things other than cash. So if you have a local organization that's going to help you facilitate whatever project, if it's let's say it's a public fire safety initiative, smoke detector, something like that. They might let you use their facilities or their phone, or they may do some mailings or provide a public service announcement for you, some volunteers. So that's an in-kind contribution. It's not cash, but the value is based on the street value of whatever they provided. So there is a value to it, but it's just not cash. So AFG doesn't allow an in-kind contribution, but some state grants will. Lots of the foundations actually encourage it, so it's a good way to go. The matching contributions, as far as cash go, it's pretty easy to understand. That's your Franklin's, Jackson's, grants, cold hard money, no substitute. All right. So as the name implies, it's just money. It's a matching requirement based on cash. It has to be, as far as the AFG goes, it has to be non-federal funds. So you couldn't take Homeland Security dollars, UASI money, and apply it for your match over here. So it has to be local cash. And they actually lowered, everybody should know, but they lowered those matching contributions this last year as well, which helped. Now the maximum is 15%. So instead of up to 20% for the larger departments, they now matching only up to 15%. So this is really tough to read, but here's sort of an example budget. This is from the AFG application. All right, so you got your budget object classes. These are all the little pieces of your budget, your personnel, your fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, all that sort of thing. So most of these are going to be zero. This was a straight-up equipment grant, so $64,000 or $54,000 there. And then it predicts your match for you based upon the information that you provided with population. So it's going to tell you, hey, you're going to owe a 10% match, and then it tells you you're going to owe $6,450 or whatever on there. All right? So the AFG budget's pretty simple. You just plug in the numbers, and it does all the math. So here's the new matching requirements for AFG. Over 1 million population is 15%. It used to be 20%. Greater than 20K, but up to 1 million, not more than 1,000,001, you've got 10%. And then for your 20K or under, you're at 5%. So this really made it a little more palatable to departments that were on the fringe if they were going to be able to make that match or not. So that was very helpful. The other thing they did that I think evened the playing field a little bit, they divided some of those awards up, 25% to career, 25% to combination, 25% to volunteer departments. And I think that's really going to help this year. We'll see how it stacks out, but I think it's going to help sort of even the playing field for the smaller departments. Is anybody EMS only? Who's EMS only? It gets pretty tough, right? I mean, you're really looking at 10% of that full AFG award. So what I would encourage you to do is look other places. Don't discount the AFG. Always apply. And you can't win the lottery without a ticket. But look for other things. Look in your state. Look for foundation grants and things like that that are alternatives that may not require a cash match. They may be willing to fully fund your project. So look for those options. Any questions? I'm just about out of business cards, so if you want to stop up and grab my email address, we work with individual departments, fire, EMS, law enforcement. So if you need assistance writing, editing, what have you with your grant, you need assistance in locating a foundation, that sort of thing, give us a call. We can definitely help you with that. That's pretty much it. I have another session this afternoon. I believe it's at 2:30 to 3:30. We're going to discuss a little more about how to find foundations and what sort of resources are out there. So if that's something that you're interested in, I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for being here so early this morning, and have a great afternoon.